safe, in the same way, differences of approaches and opinions among academics or intellectuals keeps the world safe. So what I've seen, in my definitely not very long career, is that in agriculture, whenever we went away from diversity of viewpoints and approaches to uniformity, we have faced problems. And what we've seen is that as we've moved towards NDAS, or only conventional farming or primarily conventional farming, promotion of only uniform seeds, we have new problems that have come up from the context of ecosystem services, sustainability, biodiversity, and many more. So I want to start actually with, let's see if this works. Yeah, with a few little stories. I'm sure many of you may have heard of these stories. This is the story of Arogya Pacha, which translates as the healthy green. And Arogya Pacha was discovered by a group of scientists who were surveying the hills, Agastya Malai Hills in Kerala, looking for, they were ethnobotanists essentially, so they were looking for how the local biodiversity links up to local cultures. And while they were climbing up the forests and getting more and more tired, one of the tribals suggested that they try the fruit of this plant. And as soon as the scientists started chewing on the fruit, they immediately felt a lot of energy. Of course, they took samples back to their lab and isolated the active ingredients that were causing it to give that property. And they eventually patented also a herbal sports drug called JEEVANI. But the story of JEEVANI was very short-lived, because what the scientists discovered was that if Arogya Pacha was cultivated on any soil other than the forest soils of these hills, it just didn't have those properties. And eventually, because of low supply, the whole business had to be stopped. More importantly, however, because the whole tribal community was not taken into account, or their opinions were not taken into account before the whole benefit sharing project was launched, it also led to a lot of dispute and discord within the community. More recently, while we were researching with Greg Raddick and the Art of Living Foundation in India for a project funded by the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council, we discovered, or we heard about, a newly discovered seed called Sona Moti, which is apparently a 2,000 or 3,000 year old emmer variety, which is perhaps the only grain on the planet with very high folic acid content. And this seed was given by a small old age home called Pingalwada Ashram in Amritsar in Punjab by the caretaker to a small farmer. And he was told that this is a holy seed and you must cultivate it for the sake of humanity. And the farmer, Nagpal, he took those seeds and went back. He had in the same old age home, which is also called an ashram, a place of rest. He learned traditional ecological knowledge-based farming systems, particularly natural farming. And he used this seed he cultivated this seed in about 1/8 of his farm. And over the course of 3 years, his yield increased from 3 kilos to 18 quintals. Interestingly, he says that if you try to cultivate the seed in conventional soils with pesticides and fertilizers, it will not give any yield at all. Once the claims for folic acid content were confirmed by laboratories, the demand for this wheat shot up overnight. And the farmers who were cultivating this wheat had sold all of their produce before it was even harvested. Just last month, I visited also a farm in the Kurnool region of South India. This is a small holder. He has, I think, 3 acres of land. And his name is MAHABOOB Basha. He also went and learned from South India. He learned natural farming and decided to implement it on a part of his land. And interestingly, he noticed that that part of the land that was using natural farming was actually giving higher yields for the chili seeds that he had been cultivating for years. Now, these chili seeds are actually market bought seeds. They are not traditional seeds at all. So he then converted his whole land away from conventional farming to natural farming. And interestingly, in 2016, while the whole area was hit by drought, his farm was the only one that gave a huge yield, and he made a huge profit. And the entire region had to apply for drought relief from the government. And he himself was the only farmer that didn't have to do that. Because of his high yield, he also got awarded by the state government for best agricultural practices. And you have my favorite or oldest case study. This is Babaji RAMJI KHOBRAGADE, the creator of HMT rice. He is also, or he was also a smallholder with just, I think, 2 acres of land. And it was very sad. He died, I think, very recently. He passed away in abject poverty, even though he created the rice variety that is the most popular in his region. And the local university took samples of his seed and improved it through selections. And both KHOBRAGADE and the university have plant breeders' rights in their own names for their own versions of HMT. But while the university licensed out its plant breeders' rights, as I mentioned, KHOBRAGADE died in abject poverty, not even being able to afford his own medical health care in the end. So what I would like to highlight from these case studies is that when we are promoting plant data linkages or collection of data in highly standardized methods, such that you are focusing only on one type of agriculture, then all of these voices and all of these different approaches to farming, and most importantly, these local innovations, local traditional knowledge is getting lost. And the incentives for continuing indigenous R&D, informal R&D, that leads to the increase in biodiversity in the soil and on the soil. So not just plant biodiversity, but also the soil microbiome, the enrichment of the soil microbiome. The entire knowledge is getting lost. So interestingly, in the EU, in just a couple of years ago, 2018, the European Union has, of course, passed the new organic regulation. And interestingly, the regulation itself acknowledges that by adopting biodiversity-based agriculture, particularly by adopting what it calls heterogeneous materials for agriculture, you can have advantages such as disease resistance, environmental stress resistance, increased nutritional value, and of course, just overall better ecosystem services. So now the EU is going backwards and saying that we don't want in organic agriculture to promote only uniform seeds, but we want to promote heterogeneous materials in agriculture. But as systems have to be established such that a market for heterogeneous materials can be created. And that is exactly what I have proposed in my paper as a possible blockchain-based solution. Blockchain essentially would allow for overcoming several problems that currently exist in the attempts to adopt this kind of diversified, or what we call diversification of knowledge and value flows. So it will permit for traceability to increase. It will help for the creation of missing markets by facilitating entry and access to information, and most importantly, for monetizing this information and ensuring that through smart contracts, one can, every farmer that is sharing data can monetize that data and get clear monetary incentives for continuing his or her good work. Also, it would allow for the traceability of materials to source, which is currently not possible in the existing systems, and would therefore support enhancement of trust. I've spoken to several scientists who tell me that they access biodiversity for their research through the black market, because they just either can spend their entire careers going through the existing international framework to get access to these materials, or just go through the back door. And one of the researchers I was talking to said that he then was told by the journal he was trying to publish in that in order to get his paper published, he needs to lie about his source and say that he got it from an ex-situ reserve, even though he had got it from a farmer in India. So these are the kinds of problems, very practical problems, that can be resolved by a blockchain solution that is traceable and transparent, and which allows for the benefits of maintaining and improving this kind of knowledge and seeds in situ to be shared. So for the sake of time, I will stop here. Do I have more time? I think it's over, right?
Well, I mean, we can have plenty of discussion after this. If you've got a couple more slides, we have a little bit of time.
Great, then I will proceed. What exactly do I mean by a solution? So what can happen with such a blockchain-based solution? If we were to call this solution a reseed, this was a name suggested by my co-author, and we think of a simple solution where we have three stakeholders: farmers, researchers, and consumers. What would be the benefits for the farmers? Through a blockchain-based solution, they can access markets and sell their seeds as well as their produce. They can share knowledge. Now, the EU, of course, you might know, is trying to promote migration to organic farming in compliance with consumer demands, rising consumer demands for organic produce. But big problems exist in migration because farmers just don't know how to use heterogeneous materials, how to have success in organic farming. So if we have the 4 farmers, or 3 out of 4 farmers who I shared information about in the beginning, sharing their know-how through a distributed app, and you have AI-based systems making that entry accessible widely, then you can have sharing of knowledge, and therefore allowing also farmers in similar agroclimatic zones to forecast success. It would also give benefits, of course, to researchers, because as I said, right now, researchers don't know how to legitimately source data and materials in a transparent and equitable manner. So having a transparent solution would help them access data in a more transparent and trustworthy way. It would also permit targeted searching and legitimate material sourcing. Most importantly, it can also create networks for researchers to request for scouting. So for example, if a researcher wants to cultivate wheat or wants to breed wheat, which is high in folic acid, then through the network, they can send out a request for any information on wheat varieties that are rich in, or wheat or any other varieties that are rich in folic acid. For the consumers, we would have multiple benefits in terms of ability to access local food varieties and interact with local farmers. And then a distributed app can also support consumer trends in wanting to buy local rather than something coming from halfway across the globe, and wanting to support local poor farmers. This we saw in the Sona Moti case, that as soon as the NGO involved, the Art of Living Foundation, they sent out a message to their entire network saying that we have small farmers in Punjab cultivating this type of wheat. Would you like to buy? And literally overnight, all the stocks were sold. So this would be the benefit of such a solution, roughly from the consumer viewpoint. You know, if you may have heard recently about, I'm just concluding, Hugh. So, you know, we saw just, I think, a couple of years back that our bananas were under threat because of monocultures by this.
I think we're going to have to pass over to the discussion now, just so we've got time to move on to everything. But I think really useful to have those last few slides just outlining the benefits of the blockchain solution. I think in general that's what you're proposing, and it's very well worked through proposal in the paper is very interesting in relation to what we've talked about before, particularly in terms of uniform varieties in the previous sessions, and some of the advantages that can be gained from the data produced in the uniformity registration and testing. But really what you're thinking about here is looking at the varieties